वालेकुम अस्सलाम। كيف
دكتور
حالك
محمد
محمد
رياض.
رياض؟
الحمد لله كيف جاستاذ.
الحمد لله.
सर अब शुरू करते हैं सर।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल
इजाजत है जी।
टाइम हो गया
अस्सलाम
बिल्कुल।
वालेकुम। अस्सलाम वालेकुम। In
वालेकुम
this
सलाम.
first question, our resource person is Professor Mujibur Rahman Sahab, who is one of the prominent Arabic scholar presently associated with Center of Arabic and African Studies JNU. I welcome you, sir, on behalf of UGC Malviya Mission Teachers Training Center, AMU Aligarh. Professor Mujib Saab is also serving as chairperson of the Center of Arabic and African Studies, JNU. His exclusive work on modern Arabic literature in India and translation studies of Urdu and Hindi novels is greatly appreciated by scholars of Oriental studies both in India and foreign. He is also serving as chief editor of the online Arabic quarterly research journal Hilal al-Hind since January 2021. Now I request Professor Mujibur Rahman Sahab to deliver his lecture for our respected teachers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Asad Faisal Faruqi, coordinator for this refresher course, SRC. Is it Oriental or refresher course in Oriental Studies?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I welcome you all for this lecture, and today we have 1.5 hours for lecture and then 15 minutes for discussion. So without taking much time, I'll just start. I hope to benefit from this interaction with you. The topic assigned to me by my friend, dear friend, Professor Sanaullah. He said, okay, speak on Oriental Discourse, Orientalism Discourse, which is one of the most favorite topics for me ever since I was MA student in 1991, 1993 in Jamia Millia Islamia. And our teacher, Professor Mukul Kesavan, who has retired a couple of years ago from Jamia Millia Islamia, used to teach us some of courses like capitalism, colonialism, imperialism, and one subunit was Orientalism. And then I had read Edward Said's Orientalism, which was a game changer in post-colonial studies. So I thought, okay, this is a good topic. And since this is Oriental, for Oriental subjects, so a foundational lecture on what is Orientalism, or the discourse of Orientalism, I think it's very important. And this is not new. I hope that all of you know what is Orientalism and how the discourse generated by Edward Said's book Orientalism in 1970 it created worldwide in humanities, social sciences, and in the formation of post-colonial discourse. So I will begin my lecture, and I hope that you will bear with me. I'm suffering from cough for the last 20-25 days. Therefore, when I speak very loud. But today I will not be able to speak that loud because I have to keep it little quiet. So I hope you will bear with me. So talking about Orientalism in art, literature, and cultural studies, it involves the Western depiction or portrayal of Eastern world. Eastern world things, Eastern world, Oriental world elements by Western writers, designers, artists. So particularly in the 19th century, Middle Eastern or Middle Oriental themes became a focus in Western academic world, especially in art and literature. Etymologically, the word Orientalism refers to the Orient. Orient, this is in reference to an opposition to Occident. So Orient versus Occident, East versus West, respectively. The word Orient has entered the English language from French, Orients. And in French itself, it has come from Orients, and from the Latin words Orients. So in English, as we know today, Orient means the East. So this is a cultural or civilizational construct done by the Western world. The discourse on Orientalism has taken a different dimension and different course with the publication of Edward Said's book, Magnum Opus Orientalism, in 1978. And all of us should be knowing who is Edward Said. Palestinian origin. He studied in Egypt and then in America, and he served most of his life in USA, and he is one of the profoundest and greatest intellectuals, cultural critics of 20th century. So he came out with this book, Orientalism, in 1978. And he used this term to critically describe Western patronizing attitude. When we say patronizing, we tend to believe someone who patronizes who is on the above. So this patronizing attitude of the West toward Middle Eastern, Asian, and North African societies. Edward Said argued that the West views these societies, societies of West and East. So West is them and East is us as superior. Where Western perspective portrays Oriental cultures or Eastern cultures as both alluring, attractive, alluring, at the same time threatening also. So the Eastern cultures attract them, at the same time they threaten them also. It's a kind of, they try to make a kind of distance from it because we are different from them. So contrarily, journalist Jonathan Jones suggested that much Orientalist art is stemmed from genuine admiration rather than prejudice. This is a counter narrative. So one narrative was that much of Orientalism discourse was generated by the West for the Eastern cultures, languages, and civilizations, which looked to the Eastern civilizations, Eastern cultures from the above, portraying them as different, as the other, as inferior. So the counter view, just in one word, Jonathan Jones says that this may not be wholly true. It's not that all Orientalist engagements with the East is purely stemming from a very inferiority, the feeling of superiority to the inferior languages, cultures, civilizations of the Orient. So Orientalism, the term, which has been associated famously with Edward Said's influential work that was published in 1978, he analyzed Western perceptions of the Orient, of the East, primarily Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. Edward Said's criticism or critique, C-R-I-T-I-Q-U-E, critique, centers on the idea that the Western world has constructed a largely imagined, not realistic, but imagined. It was based on their imagination only, a stereotypical view of the Orient. When we say stereotypical, means that we create stereotypes. We still continue to create the stereotypes. So the stereotypical imaging of the East basically stemmed from the West's attempt, whether academic or non-academic, of a branding or stereotyping the East as what it is today, which Edward Said in Orientalism has propounded. So the construction of this Orient, in inverted commas, Orient, was not just an academic or artistic project or pursuit, but it was a part of a wider strategy of control. Consider wider strategy, wider strategy of control. Why? In order to justify the imperialism, the colonialism, and the political domination of the non-Western, non-European world, much of the world. And you famously, it was said that sun never set on British Empire. Such was the reach of the British colonial empire. So it was a part of Orientalism as a discourse, as a discipline, was a Western construct in order to gain control of the colonized territories other than West. So in this sense, Orientalism is none but other than a framework of knowledge, framework. If you know the Itar al-Ma'rifa, framework of knowledge, एक ढांचा है, एक framework है, किसका? For knowledge and power. So you gain knowledge. This knowledge helps to gain power. Knowledge and power. Western scholars, writers, politicians created this narrative about the Orient, about the East, which served to define and contrast it with what? Rational versus irrational. So they are rational, East is irrational. Superior versus inferior. Superior Occident is the West, and inferior is the Orient. In literature, in art, and in scholarship, academic scholarship, this view depicted the East in ways that reinforced. First of all, they created stereotypes, then they worked in a way to reinforce and strengthen these stereotypes, often reducing complex cultures to a few defining features, such as exoticism. Exotic. East is exotic. Mysticism, tasawwuf, sensuality. Eastern cultures are sensual, not spiritual, and violence. So essentially, they try to characterize through their imagined portrayal of the East and creation of stereotypical images of exotic West, exotic East, mystical East, sensual East, and violent East. So East is violent, East is sensual, East is mystic, is exotic. So these stereotypical images were created by the Orientalist scholars with a view to help European colonialism and imperialism to have their control of political control, cultural control, and civilization control of the Eastern societies. In a broader sense, Orientalism became a tool, एक उनके लिए हथियार बन गया for legitimizing European imperial ambitions, serving as a means of justifying intervention. They try to justify that since East is inferior, is backward, is irrational, therefore the West, who has the moral authority to not only teach them, but also civilize them, intervene in their political matters, in their personal matters, in their individual matters, and a way of asserting their control. अभी मैं क्लास में हूँ, मैं 11 बजे की बात करूँ. This approach framed Eastern societies as in need of guidance. कि वो क्या है? उनके पास इल्म है, उनके पास तहजीब है, वो सुपीरियर है हर चीज में. And we are backward, we are illiterate, we know nothing about ourselves, and we are all going to hell. So we need their guidance. We need their civilization, and we need a kind of restructuring of ourselves. Okay. On the opposite hand, the West, the Occident, Orient and Occident, so Occident was cast, was presented as a benevolent force, Quwa, Rahima, wa Karima. Thus, Orientalism has profound implications, not only in cultural and academic realms, but also in global politics, reflecting ongoing biases and prejudices and misunderstandings that can shape international relations and perceptions even today. So the misconceptions, biases, and injustice or prejudiced views of the Eastern world, which constituted almost 70% of the geographical locations of the world, and which had the maximum natural resources of the world in these Eastern societies, say Africa or Asia. So they created a strong foundation or basis for their perpetual and continuous control of the East, not only in political terms, not only in sociological and civilizational cultural terms, more importantly, the economic exploitation of the resources of the East. So Edward Said's concept of Orientalism has since become a foundational framework. Al-Asas al-Marja'i, बुनियादी एक framework बन चुका है in post-colonial studies. So the post-colonialism, the discourse of post-colonialism is very intrinsically and deeply connected with the Orientalism, because the post-colonial discourse and also Orientalist discourse are attributed to Edward Said's book, Orientalism. Even though it's post-colonial discourse, we can find some other names also, which we'll refer to later, Homi J. Bhabha, Gayatri Speak, and others, which I will come towards the later part of this lecture. So it became a foundational framework for post-colonial studies, prompting deeper inquiry into how power and knowledge intersect. Power and knowledge intersect. We will also see how other philosophers like Italian Antonio Gramsci, with his theory of culture and hegemony, and the French philosopher, Michel Foucault's work on knowledge and power, helped Edward Said to formulate the Orientalist discourse with power. So Orientalism was about power created by the West, especially in representations of marginalized groups and cultures. So which are marginalized? Europe was not marginalized in 19th and 20th centuries. Even today, it was the Oriental societies, the Eastern societies only. So certainly, Edward Said's book, Orientalism, delves deeply into how the West has long constructed a specific image of the Orient, of the East, one image that serves its own interests and promotes its power structures, all the structures created by the West, whether it is the economic structures, the World Bank, the political structures, the UN, and other general agreement on trade and tariffs, everything that controls global geopolitics, global economics, has been created by the West, and in which Orientalism was a major instrument or major tool that has been very incisively and very deeply and very analytically proven by Edward Said in his book, Orientalism. This book is worth reading. I hope many of you have already read you reread and reread, because this is one of the most foundational works written after 1950s anywhere in the world. And this book is a must in the Eastern academia, in the Western academia. It helps us to understand the Western knowledge structure, the knowledge architecture and everything. And then, of course, Edward Said was not alone in developing this. Several other scholars helped. They were, of course, Western scholars, French scholars, European scholars were also working on the same line. But Edward Said was able to develop it into major formulation. So Said's work is foundational, in understanding how cultural representations, at-tamathulat or tamsilat as-saqafiyya, aren't merely innocent descriptions. The description about the East, about the Eastern societies, they were not innocent descriptions, but are often tied to a larger system of control and dominance, and Orientalism as it was used as a tool. The concept of terrorism. When we say Orientalism, traditionally it refers to the academic study of Eastern societies. Academic study of Eastern societies, the languages of the East, the culture of the East, geographies, histories, everything about the East. Even the sciences of the East, a study of it falls under the broader umbrella called Orientalism. So scholars, artists, travelers, filmmakers, media persons, they developed this body of work around the East, around the Orient, that is in totality dubbed as Orientalist studies. However, much of this was based not on genuine understanding about the East. Rather, they were based on deeply ingrained stereotypes or beliefs. In Orientalism, Edward Said argued that these depictions were rarely impartial. Rarely impartial. He doesn't say that almost all portrayals are flawed, but majority of the depictions, they were impartial. They were constructed and exotic other with the process of othering. So the process of othering, if you delve deeper into, was in fact done by the West. So West is self, and the other society, the Orient, is other. I think no other civilizations anywhere in the world have done this othering to others. If you study the Arab Islamic civilization, they did not do othering. The ancient Indian cultures and civilizations, they also did not do this othering as far as civilizational context is concerned. And so others, it was majorly done by, principally done by the Western scholars, the other. So West is one and the East is the other. That allowed the West to view itself as superior, civilized, and progressive, by contrast to the East, which is inferior, uncivilized, backward, primitive, irrational, and not progressing in a linear manner. Whatever progress happened in the East, in ancient or in medieval, this is not as a result of natural and progressive development, rather as a result of haphazard, illogical, and irrational development. So when they come to Taj Mahal, which is considered to be the most, what you can say, architecturally one of the wonders. And they are able to they are not able to explain how a building can be built, which is one of the wonders of the world, which is architectural marvel. And this cannot happen without a progressive, a gradual development of Oriental architecture, like in Metcalfe, in one of his books on Orientalism, when it comes to defining and describing this Taj Mahal, he is dumbfounded. Syed describes Orientalism as a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient. This framing allowed Western nations, particularly during the colonial period, starting from the 17th century onwards, sorry, to justify their actions under the guise of Al-Muhimma Al-Tahdiriya, that is civilizing mission. This mission was purportedly benevolent, kind, bringing enlightenment, light of knowledge, the progress, and order. So the society is chaotic, Eastern society is chaotic, not in order. So they came here to bring order to an inherently chaotic and backward East. One of the major formulations of the Orientalist discourse, as propounded by Edward Said, is knowledge and power. Right? The connection of knowledge with power, the relation of knowledge and power. Edward Said drew on the ideas of French philosopher Michel Foucault. So his seminal work on culture and knowledge and power, based on that, Said explored how knowledge is intertwined. That is, mutashabik, it's mutaqati'a, it's related with deeply, intrinsically linked with, intertwined with power. In Orientalism, he argued that the production of knowledge, ilm paida karna, about the East, production of knowledge about the East, whether it's scholarship, literature, art, or any form of literature produced about the West, was not an innocent or objective. So it was always subjective. Whenever they passed judgments about the East, it was subjective, not objective, and it was not innocent. They were innocent. Rather, they were driven by ulterior motives and designs that were aligned with the imperial and colonialist designs. Instead, it was a powerful tool used to justify Western political, cultural, economic, and civilizational control of the Eastern societies. The narratives about the Orient that dominated in the Occident enabled European nations to see themselves as natural, in quote unquote, natural leaders of the world. And they have been given the responsibility by God, to help the East. Here comes the evangelical aspect of it. We see that many of the Orientalist scholars who were serving in the European empires, either British empires or French empires, they were in fact recruited by their colonial masters to propagate Christianity. So if talking about the Arab world, we see much of the Lebanon and Beirut, where we see the Renaissance came through cultural route. They established schools and colleges in which they taught Christianity, through which they spread Christianity. Even in India also, we see the British Empire. Many of these Orientalist scholars, they were in fact the evangelist scholars. They were missionaries working in far-flung areas or remote areas, or to spread Christianity, or also actively engage in a scholarship to prove that Christianity is the only saving religion, the only religion, natural religion, correct religion, and all other religions are not correct. One of what we can say that the drawbacks of this Orientalist engagement through scholarship is that, and of course, colonialism and imperialism, which were in fact coming together, one of it that, inflicting the Eastern societies with a deep sense of what we say inferiority complex, murakkabun nafs, that you people are savage, you people are incapable of governing yourself, you need us, your rulers are corrupt and your systems are corrupt, you cannot govern yourself, you cannot know yourself, you need us to know yourself. And this is one of the fallbacks or drawbacks, or what we can say that tabaat or rawasib in Arabic, what we say, the after effects of colonialism, that they inflicted us with a deep sense of inferiority. Much of the third world, which was the colony of the European empires, British, French, or Portuguese, or Spanish, whatever, you see. So we are still suffering from this deep inferiority complex about ourselves, our languages, our cultures, our religions, our history, everything, and we are not able to come out of that, and we are strictly struggling with that. This view of the Orient as an inferior body, a dependent entity, permeated or penetrated every aspect of Western representations about the East. Sorry. This allowed colonial powers to rationalize, justify or rationalize their domination, claiming they were merely bringing order, rationality, civilization to a place that without them, without the Europeans or the Westerners, would remain undeveloped and irrational. This intertwining of knowledge and power, intertwining of knowledge and power creates a type of discourse that shapes the very reality of what it means to be Eastern or Oriental, making it very difficult for the people of the East or the Orient to define themselves outside those imposed identities imposed by the West on the people of the East. Cultural representation and stereotyping. How cultural representation was done by them, how stereotyping was done by the Western powers, of course, helped by the Orientalist scholars. One of Edward Said's main points in Orientalism is that Western representations of the East were often wildly too much inaccurate, bilkul ghalat, filled with exoticized and sensationalized stereotypes. For instance, Oriental societies were commonly depicted as sensual, mysterious, corrupt, violent, or overly spiritual, unscientific, that is, spiritual. These stereotypes were found or appeared in travelogues, and they wrote many travelogues. Every European is writing a travelogue in literature, visual arts, and these persisted over centuries and continue even today. Such portrayals made the Orient seem both attractive, alluring, and dangerous also. Fascinatingly exotic, but threateningly foreign, or the other to that. This has given rise to a double-edged perception of the East as both an object of desire and also a target of fear, allowing Western audiences to indulge in a sense of both fascination and superiority. You will notice that this image of exotic East still continues. When European travelers, American or European travelers come to India, so they are intrigued and fascinated by the snake charmers and others, and or the tribal occult practices. They will go there, they will stay with them. You see, this curiosity, in fact, is ingrained in them by the Orientalist knowledge about the East. That East is exotic. So when they say exotic means something which cannot be explained. Or the flying rug of the Arabian Nights. So Arabian Nights was also an important, a treatise in which it was interpreted by the Orientalist scholars as being the Oriental stereotype, where things are not rational, things are not scientific. So such kind of stereotypical images about them being beautiful, being exotic, was created and perpetuated and continues even today. It was deliberately done in order to tell us that you are not scientific, you are not rational, and therefore, even though we like some of the aspects of you, but you are not scientific. This stereotyping led to the simplification of complex cultures and reduced individuals to caricatures that aligned with Western fantasies. Everyone has fantasies, so West to have fantasies. Writers like Rudyard Kipling, when he wrote about India, Gustav Flaubert, who wrote about Egypt, and countless others portrayed Eastern peoples and places in ways that aligned with this Orientalist framework. This distortion prevented any genuine understanding of the East, instead of reinforcing a set of images that were recycled across generations. So images, stereotypes are being recycled, and now in this age of media and social media, these images are being recycled. The relationship of Orientalism and colonialism, as has been already pointed out, that Orientalism was closely associated with colonialism and imperialism. In fact, it was kind of an army. Orientalism was a kind of foot soldier or army of colonialism. And Syed very critically, very incisively analyzes how Orientalism is directly connected with colonialism, European colonialism. He argued that Orientalism was more than an academic curiosity. Of course, we have to admit that the knowledge that they have produced about us, about our languages, our history, our cultures is enormous. Even today, you take any small subject, you find that the authority book is written by them only. We rely on those, and still today they are reference books. Even the printing also was started by them, or done by them. They propagated our knowledge in geography, in excavation, in archaeology. We are deeply indebted to them. We see that there have been many discoveries who discovered ancient Egypt and the pharaohs and all. It goes to the Britishers, and also in India, who discovered Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. It goes to them in 1932. When Marshall, who was an archaeologist, he discovered. So, and of course, in every domain, in every aspect, the contribution made by them is enormous, and we owe it to them. But this is not only one aspect of this of academic pursuit. Rather, according to Edward Said, when he delved deeper and analyzed from various angles and dimensions, he found that Orientalism was a political and ideological project. ये एक प्रोजेक्ट था. प्रोजेक्ट हम किसको कहते हैं जो डिजाइन के साथ कोई चीज शुरू की जाती है. When some work is started with a plan and with a design and with a purpose, that is called a project. So Orientalism it's not another product or something which came out of its own, out of a curiosity, a love for knowledge with the European scholars. Rather, it was a project, ideological project, political project, which served colonial interests, colonial objectives. The British Empire, for example, used Orientalist scholarship to study, map, and classify its colonies in the Middle East, South Asia, and Africa. So they had to do it. They had to create maps. They had to classify, and they had to study, because they believe, essentially, in order to govern well, you have to know your subjects. जब तक आप अपने महकूमीन को अच्छी तरह से नहीं जानेंगे, नहीं पहचानेंगे, आप उन पर अच्छी तरह से हुकूमत नहीं कर सकते. So we find them going to interiors, in tribal areas, in jungles, and producing math studies about everything. So it was primarily driven by the need to know the subject in order to govern the subjects. This knowledge was essential for control. By knowing how to frame local customs, religions, and governance systems, the British and other colonial powers, where they were found, could better govern and exploit these societies and also exploit their natural resources. Colonial powers created a structure in which the West was seen as ideal. European system and values held as universal benchmarks. So their education system, their moral system, everything, their value system, they are a benchmark onto which the European system had to be modeled. Eastern societies were assessed, evaluated and assessed through this lens, leading to the conclusion that the Eastern societies were lacking, deficient by these Western standards. So in every parameter, the West is above there, and they have to be brought up, they have to be civilized, they have to be cultured, they have to be educated in order to raise their level. Colonial authorities often used Orientalist knowledge. The knowledge produced by the Orientalist scholars about us to justify colonial rule, arguing that their interventions were necessary for the East's own progress and development. कि जब तक वो हमें अंग्रेजी तालीम नहीं देंगे, उनका नहीं देंगे, तो हम आगे नहीं बढ़ पाएंगे. तो अब आप you can imagine that in 1835, when Macaulay brought the education policy for the first time, he replaced English with French, Persian with English. Earlier, Persian was the medium of instruction. And what was his motive? And he has famously said that he wants to create a class of people who are brown in color and they're British in thinking. So that was, we can see that education system for the Orient that they created had a specific, a very clear design. So the concept of Orientalism, as critiqued by Edward Said, has its roots in centuries of interaction between Europe and what it defined as the Orient, Europe and the Orient. So this definition of Orient was given by them only. So they divided the whole world into two binaries. One is Orient and one is Occident. Orient is what? Orient is the whole world other than the European one. It's not only geographic distribution or division, it is a civilizational or cultural division. By cultural division, I mean the world has been divided culturally and civilizationally into two spheres. One sphere belongs to the West, so that is Occident. Irrespective of the fact, if one country or some part of the country of the world belongs to the East, Australia and New Zealand, for example, geographically they are not part of the West, but civilizationally they are part of the West. Or countries, Turkey, for example, part of Turkey is in Europe, in the West, but civilizationally it is not part of the West. So historically, Orientalism emerged from Europe's early encounters with the Middle East and Asia, as well as the expansion of European empires and their complex relationships with these regions. By understanding the historical context, we can see how Orientalism evolved as a tool of knowledge and domination, which permeated European art, literature, and scholarship. This legacy, this understanding of the East was not static, fixed nahi tha, but was shaped by evolving political, economic, and intellectual forces that framed the East in ways that supported European interests and continues to support European interests. As we can see that the forms of colonialism and imperialism have changed. Now we do not have physical colonialism. We have other forms of colonialism, economic colonialism, imperialism. They have created institutions and structures through which they dominate the whole world. All the institutions, even the United Nations and all the economic forums that they have been created by them. All the multinationals are in their heads and they have operations around the world. And through these multinationals, they in fact govern the whole world. Thinking about the early European encounters with the East, so Europe's fascination with the Orient dates back to ancient times, with significant influence from Greek and Roman perspectives. So the perspective about the East continues from the Greco-Roman periods. In ancient Greece, for example, Persian and other Eastern empires were viewed and perceived as exotic, the same as the modern European view of the East as exotic and powerful, yet fundamentally different from Greek civilization. This dichotomy of this binary of East and West, right from the Greco-Roman period, reinforced a sense of cultural superiority, framing the East as the other. So, classical historians and scholars like Herodotus, who is considered to be the father of historiography, he described Eastern cultures with fascination and often suspicion. So, fascination and suspicion, this is the same attitude as we find in modern Orientalism. This is an attitude which continued to influence European thought for centuries together. During the Middle Ages, the interactions between Europe and the Islamic world intensified, particularly with the Crusades. When Islam spread to other parts, it intensified, increased interaction with the European world. So this led to the clash between Islam and Christianity. And this clash or conflict we know in history as Crusades, Al-Hurub As-Salibiyya. These violent religious conflicts between Christian Europe and the Muslim ruled territories added layers of tension, mistrust, and hostility. Islamic societies, however, also acknowledged for their contributions to science, philosophy, and other arts, which trickled into Europe through contact with Muslim Spain, and also the Crusades, and also the capture of Constantinople by the Turks in 1453, which was the seat of Byzantine Empire, and which made the people in Byzantine to flee, carrying their books, and which prompted a return to the study of ancient Greek knowledge through Arabic translations. And this fueled and propelled the Western Renaissance in 16th century onwards. Yet, even with this admiration, the West maintained a sense of difference and superiority. So it is not that, this is a new phenomenon of modern European onslaught or capture or colonization of the East. In fact, it has deep roots from the Greco-Roman period. Orientalism in the age of exploration and colonialism, it's a part of history now. Everybody knows how European civilization is spread around the world and which phases it had with exploration and colonialism. We find that one Columbus, in a spirit of exploration, he starts for India and reaches North America. Uh, uh, so and then also or the Vasco da Gama, he comes. These are only two figures, but hundreds and hundreds of them. Stage of exploration. So the creation and expansion of any civilization happens initially with the spirit of exploration. After that, it is followed by discoveries and inventions and all that with the production and creation of knowledge base. So the rise of age of exploration in the 15th and 16th centuries in Europe marked a turning point in European engagement with the East. European nations primarily motivated by the search for wealth. So initially they were looking for wealth because Europe was backward. Europe was poor, much poorer than the East. So they were looking for wealth through these explorations, and trade routes began venturing to Africa, Asia, and the Americas. So with the establishment of colonial trading companies like the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company and other European companies, the Europeans gained access to vast new territories and resources. As these companies extended their influence, their reach, they relied on an increasing body of Orientalist, in inverted commas, Orientalist knowledge, maps, reports, and studies about these regions which they have ventured to, either for purpose of trading, to control and exploit them more effectively. In this period of exploration, Orientalism became not just a body of knowledge, but also a practical tool for colonial administration. Looking to the case of India, so the direct political control of India happened in 1858, after the 1857 revolt, failure of the revolt. But before that, we see gradually they were occupying or annexing one state after the other. And we find that most of the territories, most of the states in India, they became loyal to the British. But finally, in 1858, India came under their political control. But it started much early with the establishment of British East India Company in 1600 and their gradual expansion. So much so that you will find a company. Can you imagine today that a company owning soldiers and armies? What for you need armies, you soldiers? So obviously their intention right from the very beginning was very clear. They are here for control, for the commercial control, economic control, and economic control cannot be achieved without political control. So ultimately, political control came later, but their economic control came much earlier. So the European scholars, missionaries, and later colonial officials wrote extensively about the cultures, languages, religions, and the regions of the areas they came and they encountered with. This growing body of work was marked by both fascination and disdain. Fascination and disdain. Disdain is hakarat ko kehte hain. So they were, of course, impressed also, and at the same time, they were disdainful. They looked down upon these Eastern cultures, and they were just as inferior and needed of civilizing. They needed civilizing, of course, as I mentioned earlier. So they had certain parameters set for European things, European values, European morality, European polity, European everything standards, and they compared the Eastern ones and found our as inferior and needed civilizing intervention, and for that they needed political control. So it became a tool for justification. So in this way, Orientalism provided a justification for colonial rule, as Europeans claimed it was their duty to uplift the people of the East. ये उनकी जिम्मेदारी है कि यहाँ के लोगों को महज़ब बनाए, उनको सिखाएं, क्योंकि इनको कपड़ा भी नहीं पहनना आता, इनको खाना नहीं आता, इनको बोलना नहीं आता, इनके तौर तरीके नहीं, ये गंदे हैं, ये है तो वो है, or they do not know how to govern themselves. So in order to teach them how to govern themselves, they need their political control. Enlightenment and the rationalization of Orientalism. We see that in Europe, Enlightenment came. Enlightenment coincided with Renaissance. Renaissance is Enlightenment, the age of Enlightenment, when Europe became free from the clutches of the church and started a movement for Enlightenment. So Enlightenment era in Europe, with its emphasis on, हम जानते हैं, reason, modern civilization, European civilization based on reason, rationality, science, and classification of knowledge. This Enlightenment view contributed significantly to shaping Orientalism as an academic discipline. The thinkers of the Enlightenment age, the scholars, they tried to categorize and understand the whole world in a systematic way, leading to the development of scientific studies, scientific quote unquote. So whatever they do is scientific, what others do is unscientific. So the knowledge of the Orient, of course, it possesses the knowledge, but it was not scientific. So they tried to classify scientifically the knowledge structure, the corpus of the knowledge that the Orient possessed. However, these studies were often conducted with Eurocentric bias that categorized Western society, Eastern societies as backward, unchanging, static, reinforcing stereotypes rather than questioning them. This period saw the emergence of Orientalist studies as formal discipline, particularly in France, Britain, Italy, Holland, in most of the European countries, where scholars and travelers published extensive works on Eastern languages, literature, and history. We know that the engagement with Oriental subjects like Arabic language, Islam, Hinduism, Sanskrit, everything about the West is not the product of only 17th, 18th century. The departments were started in European universities, like in Sorbonne University, in the Italian universities, right from the 12th and 13th centuries. These universities are very old. Some of these universities have an age of 1,000 years. Since their encounter with the Arab Islamic civilization in Spain and in Sicily, they were in fact, there were academies and the departments for Oriental studies established in Oxford University also in 1600s. The Oriental Studies Department in Cambridge also. In much of the universities, old classical universities of Europe, there was one department about Oriental studies and languages and cultures. So the Orientalist scholars, the French ones, the British or the Dutch, they published extensive works on Eastern languages, literatures, and histories. Antonio Galland, for example, translated Alf Layla wa Layla, 1001 Nights. In the early 18th century, this is one example of how European literature was adapted to the Western taste, portraying the East as a land of magic and sensuality. These works spoiled Western imaginations, but also distorted Eastern's realities by framing them through a romanticized, exotic, unscientific, magical lens that served Western appetite for the mysteries, as if the land of the East is only land of the magic, land of the Aladdin's Chirag, where everything happens through magic. So such stereotypes, of course, for children and for all of us, when we read these stories, they appeal us, we like them. So, through these stories or narratives, a stereotype of the East was created in the age of Renaissance, European Renaissance, and Enlightenment. Now, the movement of Romanticism, we know that the 19th century is considered to be the age or period of romantic movement, Romanticism in literature. So that also helped to create and perpetuate a romanticized, exoticized image of the East in European literature. In Europe, as we know that Romanticism as a movement, as a literary movement, or as a cultural movement also started in art and literature, which further enhanced and solidified or cemented Orientalism in popular culture. Romantic artists and writers were fascinated by themes of exoticism, mystery, and the supernatural elements, supernatural things, finding inspiration in the Orient, in the East, which they saw as a perfect setting for these themes. This was the period of Orientalist painting with artists like Eugene Delacroix and Jean-Louis Jerome, creating vivid, idealized depictions of Middle Eastern and North African life. And that is how this romantic movement also helped establish the unscientific romantic image of the Orient. However, these depictions were often based on stereotypes rather than authentic experiences, as many of these artists never visited any region which they painted or portrayed. Instead, they relied on Western notions, Western accounts that framed the East as sensual, violent, and exotic, magical, reinforcing Western notions of cultural superiority over the Eastern societies. These paintings, like much romantic Orientalist literature, depicted the Orient in ways that satisfied Western fantasies about obscured the complex realities of the Eastern societies. So the origin of Oriental studies happened in the 18th and 19th centuries, focusing on the study of languages, cultures, and religions of Eastern societies. But the beginning, as I mentioned, has happened much earlier with the establishment of academies and the departments in European universities as early as 13th and 14th centuries. Edward Said has examined in his book, Orientalism, that the interest in Oriental knowledge did not develop in isolation, but closely intertwined with the rise of European colonial empires, as I have already mentioned, because they needed the knowledge of the governed subject, governed areas in order to understand them and also to rule them in a better way. Because whenever they do anything, their claim about we are perfectionists. Whether you agree or not, this one feature about the West is that, perfectionism, whatever the love of knowledge, we cannot deny the fact. And if you examine the history of civilizations, you will find the civilization which is marked and characterized by a deep love for knowledge, only that, and which lasts for a considerable period of time, only that civilization is able to create a mark. See the history of the Arabs and the Muslims for about 1,000 years. This is marked by a spirit of love, a spirit of knowledge, acquiring knowledge. We see the scholars dedicating their whole life to the study of a particular discipline, and they excel in that. So as long as they remain committed to this love of knowledge, they're able to do that. And the modern Western civilization is also claiming the same, and we find it that. And therefore, we find, which may be true to some extent, that the love of knowledge or the sincerity to learning or sincerity is what distinguishes them from others. And this is how we find that uh, knowledge per se is supposed to be the sacred, muqaddas. So in Europe, you will not find any discipline to be considered to be less or inferior, and other disciplines to be superior. No, the knowledge that your subject area, your specializing, your expertise, and your proficiency in that is important, not your subject. You take a subject which is considered to be very advanced, but you are a zero in it, it has no significance at all. But if you take a subject which is the subject of your love and passion, and you specialize in it, you excel in it, and you are counted for it, you are referred to it. So this is what characterizes them. This fact we cannot deny. So the Edward Said's critique in Orientalism brought a revolutionary perspective to the way Western knowledge of the East has been constructed and applied. His central argument, as pointed out earlier, that Orientalism is not merely an academic field or aesthetic style, but a systematic framework of thinking that categorizes the East as other, a place fundamentally different from the West, and defined by its alleged certain attributes, as mentioned earlier, of exotism, of irrationality, of staticism, of backwardness, and all that. So Said argued that this framework has shaped how the West has perceived the West of the East and how it interacts with Eastern societies, creating an us versus them dichotomy or binary that reduces the rich complexity of the East to a set of stereotypes and caricatures. This perception, he asserts, is not based on a genuine or objective understanding of Eastern cultures, but is instead rooted in Western perceptions, Western assumptions, and the power dynamics of colonialism. Through Orientalism, Western scholars, writers, artists portrayed Eastern societies in ways that reflect and reinforce Western dominance, depicting the East as a passive, unchanging land in need of Western dominance, Western intervention, and guidance. Said's critique highlights that these depictions have little to do with the realities of Eastern life and are instead of projections of Western fantasies, fears, and prejudices often shaped to justify colonial exploitation of or political control. Thus, Orientalism is not simply a distorted view, but a deeply ingrained discourse that sustains the imbalance of power between the East and the West, affecting modern perceptions even today in media portrayals, international relations, by revealing how deeply embedded this bias is in Western scholarship and culture. Edward Said has challenged the readers to question and deconstruct, dismantle or deconstruct these long-held assumptions, calling for a more nuanced and equitable understanding of the East as it exists today. So, discourse of colonialism has produced a post-colonial discourse. We find that several other scholars influenced by Orientalist Discourse or Book of Science or Orientalism has produced a post-colonial discourse like Homi Bhabha, Gayatri Spivak, and others. So they, through post-colonial discourse, they are re-examining and reassessing or reweaving the colonial legacy of the East, and the post-colonialism and Orientalism are deeply connected with each other. The influence of Orientalist discourse on various academic disciplines is immense, is huge, particularly on anthropology, history, and literature, because it has helped to establish Orientalist views as a form of knowledge in inverted commas that has framed the East as fundamentally different from and inferior to the West. This framework was deeply embedded with these fields, as mentioned, how Eastern societies were studied and represented in Western literary canons, often reinforcing the power structures of colonialism and imperialism. So the important fields that the Orientalist discourse has impacted is anthropology. It has contributed to the construction of Eastern societies as objects of study. In history also, we find that it left a deep impact on the discipline of history. Historians, particularly in the context of colonialism, often depicted Eastern civilizations as stagnant, backward, or incapable of progress without Western influence. For instance, the history of India during the British rule was frequently framed as one of the chaos, tyranny, and ignorance until the arrival of the British. As a result of the post-colonialist discourse, we find the subaltern historiography that was started by Guha and others, Dipesh Chakrabarti and other subaltern historiography in India and around the world also, or history from the below. In literature also, Orientalism influenced both the production of works about the East and reception of Eastern literary traditions. Western writers, poets, particularly during the 18th and 19th centuries, romanticized and exoticized the Orient, often creating distorted or highly stylized images of the Orient. And the example of the Arabian Nights has already been given, or the writers like Lord Byron, Gustave Flaubert, or Pierre Loti, among many others, they perpetuated these Orientalist views, presenting the East as a place of decadence and intrigue, filled with harems, sultans, mysticism, but lacking the rationality and the modernity of the West. So the influence of Orientalism in literature, therefore, extended beyond merely shaping the popular imagination. It also served to justify the colonial project in literature by presenting the East as a realm of desire, a place where you can desire or of political or physical control or exploiting the resources, but also as a stagnant and need of reform. So at one place, this is the rich, it is exotic, this is very attractive. So we need them, we want to have them, but it is stagnant, it is not scientific, and this literature also not scientific. So we need to reform these societies. So writers and artists use their works to convey ideas about superiority of Western culture and the inferiority of Eastern cultures, languages, and civilizations. Orientalism has left a lasting legacy, its impact. It's a groundbreaking impact on scholarship, laying the groundwork for post-colonial studies, as I have mentioned. Additionally, it has sparked conversations about identity, representation, and global politics. Orientalism of Edward Said demonstrated that cultural hegemony, al-haymana Saqafiyya, does not end with political independence. Even after decolonization, Orientalist views continue to shape how the West views the East and how the East views itself. This legacy persists in modern media, foreign policy, even international relations, where certain biases and stereotypical representations remain influential. We see that in Hollywood movies. We see that in European movies. We see that in their books, in their cartoons, in their cultural possessions, in their media. Everywhere we find that the continuation of that Orientalist images about the East. And in fact, as already mentioned, that this is the age of neocolonialism, and this is more powerful and more strong. Nowadays, you do not need physical control of any place. Now you have meta structures around the world through which you can control sitting in your own country, like United States is doing, like Europe is doing. They're controlling much of the world. So Orientalism was established as a system of knowledge. That it was knowledge in anthropology, history, and literature. But as discussed earlier, this is skewed, this is biased, this is not objective, and this is based on ideologies. These ideologies are deep-rooted right from Greco-Roman period, and they continued and they intensified and deepened in the colonial the exploration, the age of exploration, and they were further cemented and deepened in the age of colonialism and imperialism, and they were in fact used as tools or instrument for establishing the political control of the East. So we find that during those times, most of the Orientalist scholars, either they were part of the empire, serving as their employees, or even if they are doing independent, they were greatly influenced by this attitude. Now, Orientalism, our Orientalist studies are not one. I don't have much time, only 5 minutes. I'll just briefly point out. So there are several schools of Orientalism. And of course, this British Orientalist school, because British Empire or British colonialism was the most expansive and most or the greatest, and it was said that sun never set under British Empire. So scholars who were associated with British colonialism, they produced knowledge about India, about language, our languages, James Stuart Mill and Munro and all that, pioneers of study of Sanskrit. So one is British school. Important characteristic is that this is very much the British and French schools of Orientalism. They are very much colonialist in nature, because British Empire and the French Empire in limited parts of the world and most parts of the world, they were serving the interests of their colonial masters. Then we have Dutch Orientalist school. The Dutch Orientalist school is also very profound, and we see several scholars from Netherlands who contributed significantly to the knowledge of the Orient. Then we have this German Orientalism. This is totally slightly different from, because German Orientalism is not characterized by this colonial designs, because Germany was not considered to be or known as an imperialist power. Therefore, we find a kind of objectivity in their studies in German Orientalism. Then we have the Russian Orientalism is very profound. Russian scholars who study Arabic language or Oriental languages and cultures, they also contribute significantly. So, and then we have the Italian ones, and they are the oldest ones, the Italian Orientalism, because the earliest departments of Arabic and Islamic studies or Orientalist studies were established in Italian universities. So they also have one particular school. So that is also, since it started initially or at early phases, we find it aligned with their Orientalist colonial design. So in all of this context, Orientalism continues to shape how the East is perceived, reinforcing stereotypes and maintaining a power imbalance between the West and Eastern societies. Orientalism has significantly influenced Western foreign policy and international relations, particularly how Western powers engage with regions in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. Orientalist assumptions about Eastern societies viewed as backward or primitive have justified military and political interventions, such as the US invasion of Iraq in 2003 and the war in Afghanistan. So these actions were framed as missions to liberate Eastern societies and bring democracy, but they were heavily influenced by the belief that these regions were incapable of self-governance and needed Western guidance. Geopolitical and economic interests, often masked by this civilizing rhetoric, were a driving force behind these interventions. Additionally, Orientalism has contributed to the rise of Islamophobia and xenophobia. Phobia, that is that, al-khawf min al-Islam, Islamophobia, and xenophobia, that is fear of the foreigners, particularly in the West. The portrayal of Eastern societies as dangerous and backward in the Western media has fueled fears about Muslims and Islam. Events like the 9/11 attacks and the rise of ISIS have worsened these perceptions, contributing to the framing of conflicts as a battle between Western civilizations and violent other. We already know that the publication of Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations was considered to be at that point of time a path-breaking study as that of Edward Said's book. But soon it was discredited. So, but it was there. It is in their mind that it is a clash of civilizations. The Western civilization, which is Christian, and other civilizations which are non-Christians. Policies such as the war on terror, immigration restrictions, discriminatory surveillance programs have been justified by these Orientalist tropes portraying Muslim majority countries as threats. So this is the continuation of their stereotypical perceptions created by the Orientalist knowledge or Orientalist discourse. This has led to widespread discrimination against Muslim communities in Western countries, reinforcing divisions between the East and the West, and perpetuating a climate of fear and hostility towards the Eastern communities. In conclusion, Orientalism continues to have a profound impact on both popular culture and political discourse, perpetuating very harmful stereotypes and justifying power imbalances from Hollywood films to news coverage and foreign policy. The
هناك مشكلة للصوت؟
السلام عليكم.
السلام.
السلام عليكم.
مدير سر
He is disconnected.
الصوت لا يأتي.
نعم صحيح. أعتقد هناك مشكلة. مدير سر
Assalamu alaikum, sir.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. أعتقد هناك مشكلة للأستاذ مجيب الرحمن. connection.
ماذا حدث؟ هل نستطيع أن نعرف؟
أعتقد دكتور أجمل وهو يتصل به.
طيب.
بالأستاذ مجيب الرحمن.
نعم. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
Assalamualaikum.
ओवर हो गया ना?
دكتور أجمل.
السلام عليكم. نعم. يس.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله. هل تكلمت مع الأستاذ مجيب الرحمن؟
لا الله ما تكلم. فجأة أنا شفته يعني أنا
सर
قد
सर
انقطع
सर
الخط.
सर सर अभी ज्वाइन करेंगे, शायद लाइट चली गई है उनके यहाँ, कुछ कनेक्टिविटी प्रॉब्लम आ गई है सर, कह रहे थे।
हाँ
जी, जी,
वही
जी।
शायद यस हाँ मुझे भी लगा। तो ही विल रिजॉइन सर, ही विल रिजॉइन।
जी सर 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 ने कहा है कि अभी वो ज्वाइन करेंगे, कोशिश कर रहे हैं अगर।
हाँ
जी
ओके ठीक है।
नहीं नहीं। हेलो।
ये सर लाइट
نعم
चली गई थी क्या
أستاذ.
सर?
نعم نسمعك.
Sorry, I just lost connection because of power cut. So
हाँ
I had almost finished my lecture. But
जी
now
जी
it is, for interaction, if you have any questions on the lecture, I can.
जी
Yeah.
So it was a
Respond to it.
wonderful lecture, sir. It was a wonderful lecture, and we benefited a lot. And really, it is a the magnum opus like of lecture on the Orientalism.
It's
My
very
question is,
interesting one. It is, yeah. It gives us a framework to reassess ourselves.
exactly, sir. My question
Yes.
is that the Orientalism will be applied only culture and literature, or any other genre of human values.
Everything.
Everything.
Every knowledge that the West produced, Western scholars produced about the East, related to history, related to culture, anthropology,
Economics also.
everything, even the in the science branches of science, physical sciences, experimental sciences, about these, that the Western scholars have studied about this. This constitutes the body of Orientalist knowledge. And doesn't even architecture, for example. So they have classified Western architecture, Eastern architecture, every discipline, every aspect of activity of the East, which was the subject study of the Western scholars. That is part of Orientalist knowledge, not related
Yes.
to culture and literature alone, everything.
Yes, sir. Okay, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
سر
for this wonderful
عندما
lecture.
كان هناك مناقشة في جامعة كيرالا،
نعم.
نحن يعني أصحاب اللغات أو أقسام اللغات وحتى الإنجليزية في Faculty of Oriental Studies، عندما كان هناك مناقشة بعض الأساتذة قالوا أن كلمة Orientalism هذا هو سلبية ليس إيجابية. بالنسبة إلينا ماذا؟ هل هذا صحيح أم لا؟
صحیح. The Orientalism is a legacy. ٹھیک ہے. This is their legacy. And we did not coin this term. It is they who coined us as Oriental studies. And the continuation of Oriental studies, I think it's a blot and this should be discontinued, in my opinion. We do not have this Oriental studies. And this is further degrading ourselves. ٹھیک ہے. What we do, for us, everything about the East is Oriental. Even our science is also Oriental science. But what we do in our universities, languages like, Urdu, Hindi and Persian, they are part of Oriental. And who is doing this? Ourselves we are doing. As if what they have done to us, we are doing to our own some inferior, so-called inferior subjects like Arabic, Urdu, Persian and other subjects. So
حتى
I don't agree.
حتى الإنجليزية حتى
No,
الإنجليزية.
No. I differ with this. English is always part of Occidental. Even in our universities, they are superior. They consider themselves superior. English literature superior. Other literatures inferior. So this binary persists here also in our academia, in our universities, and this must be done away with. If you see the history of the Oriental departments, these departments were established by the Britishers, and they still continue, isn't it? This classification was given by them. Why do we continue the same classification?
Yes, correct.
سر یہ ایک کوشچن ہے کہ جو کچھ ماڈرن اورینٹلسٹ ہے جیسے کہ اگناس گلزہر ہے، اے جے آربری ہے اور اسی طرح سے ڈبلیو واٹ ہے، کیونکہ میں اسلامک اسٹڈیز میں ہوں تو ان کو پڑھنے سے ایسا لگتا ہے کہ دے ہیو جسٹ اڈاپٹیڈ اکیڈمک اپروچ. تو کیا ان کے پیچھے بھی کوئی آئیڈیالوجیکل پروجیکشن ہے یا یہ جسٹ یہ اکیڈمک اپروچ ہی یہ اپنا رہے ہیں؟ تھینک یو.
دیکھیے اس میں جو ہے سارے کے سارے مستشرقین ایک ہی طرح کے ہوں گے ایسا یہ ممکن نہیں ہے. ان میں کچھ انصاف پسند بھی ہیں، اور ایڈورڈ سعید نے اپنی کتاب میں واضح طور سے لکھا ہے کہ سارے کے سارے مستشرقین جو ہیں وہ ایک طرح کے نہیں ہیں. کچھ تو بہت ہی زیلاٹس قسم کے تھے اور بہت زیادہ نفرت سے دیکھتے تھے، اپنے آپ کو بہت سپیریئر دیکھتے تھے. کچھ ان میں انصاف پسند بھی ہیں، انصاف پسند بھی ہیں، بہت علمی اور آبجیکٹو طریقے سے انہوں نے اس کا مطالعہ کیا ہے. اور بہت سارے مستشرقین تو ایسے بھی ہیں جو بلکہ ویسٹ کے مقابلے میں ایسٹ کو سپیریئر بھی وہ بتاتے ہیں کہیں کہیں. تو یہ جو انہوں نے کہا ہے ایڈورڈ سعید کا نے یہ جو کہا ہے، ان کا جو کرٹک ہے وہ زیادہ تر اورینٹلسٹ کے اوپر ہے اگر ہم اس کو ایک سسٹم ایک نظام کے طور پر دیکھیں گے تو. لیکن ان میں بہت سارے ایسے بھی ہیں جنہوں نے بہت انصاف کے ساتھ اور آبجیکٹیوٹی کے ساتھ مطالعہ کیا. ایک چیز ہمیں یہ ذہن میں رکھنی چاہیے کہ ایک بلیور کا اپنے مذہب اور اپنی تہذیب اور اپنے ثقافت کے بارے میں دیکھنا وہ الگ ہوگا اس سے جو کہ اس کا ماننے والا نہیں ہے. تو اب اگر ہم بلیور ہیں، مومن ہیں، ہم اپنی تاریخ کو، اپنی ثقافت کو، اپنے مذہب کو دیکھتے ہیں اور اس کی تشریح اور تفسیر کرتے ہیں تو ہمارا نظریہ الگ ہوگا اس سے جو کہ بلیور نہیں ہے. تو سارے کے سارے یہ لوگ تھے، وہ لوگ تھے جنہوں نے یا تو وہ کرسچن تھے یا ایتھیسٹ تھے یا اپنے آپ کو آبجیکٹیو مانتے تھے. تو بالکل ہمارے جیسا نہیں ہوگا. یہ بھی ہمیں دیکھنا چاہیے کہ بہت سارے اورینٹلسٹ وہ اسلام سے متاثر ہو کر انہوں نے اسلام بھی قبول کیا جب ان کو لگا کہ جو وہ پڑھ رہے ہیں، لیکن ان کی تعداد کم ہے، لیکن ہیں ایسے بھی لوگ ہیں. تو طرح طرح کے لوگ ہیں. اچھا ایک بتایا جاتا ہے ہمیں کہ ان کا اپروچ میٹھے زہر کا بھی ہوتا ہے ان میں سے کچھ کا کہ اچھی اچھی باتیں کہیں گے, بیچ میں کچھ ایسا وہ جملہ کہہ دیں گے, ایسا وہ کہہ دیں گے جو آپ کے ذہن میں
ٹائم اینڈ ہو رہا ہے تو سر
شک
اس کو
پیدا
اینڈ
کرے
کر
گا.
دیجیے گا سر.
جی
سر ٹائم کیونکہ اینڈ ہو رہا ہے کیونکہ 10:45 پہ ہمارا سیکنڈ
ٹھیک
لیکچر
ہے,
شروع ہونے والا ہے, تو اس کو اینڈ
ٹھیک ہے,
کر
ٹھیک
دیجیے
ہے.
گا یہاں پہ
تو
پورا کر کے
نہیں,
بات
اب یہ ہے کہ
محمد
سوال
اسد
کا
بھی
جواب دینا
اورینٹلسٹ
ہوگا.
کے لیے سر,
ٹھیک ہے,
محمد
تو
اسد,
یہ جی جی
محمد اسد
جی جی
جی انہوں نے اسلام قبول کیا تھا. محمد اسد
ہاں, محمد اسد نے اسلام قبول کیا
اور
تھا.
ترجمہ بھی کیا تھا قرآن کا.
جی جی
تھینک یو سر.
پیکتال, مارمدس پیکتال کے بارے میں بھی کہا جاتا ہے کہ انہوں نے بھی اسلام قبول کیا تھا. ترجمہ جو ہے قرآن کا,
قرآن جی ترجمہ قرآن
ہاں, وہ اوتھینٹک مانا جاتا ہے.
اور یہ بھی نا سر, ایڈورڈ ولیم لین انہوں نے لیکسیکوگرافی کیا تھا نہیں, بہت سارے والیومز میں.
ان کے کارنامے تو بہت زیادہ ہیں. وہ
جی
ہم
جی جی وہ ایجپٹ سے, کیرو سے متاثر تھے
اب
سر.
آپ لوگ اگلے لیکچر کے لیے, کیونکہ 10:45 پہ وہ شروع ہو رہا ہے, تو اس لیے سر کو
ٹھیک ہے, بہت بہت شکریہ آپ لوگوں کا.
بہت بہت شکریہ سر.
السلام علیکم.
بہت مفید اور کارآمد لیکچر تھا.
تھینک یو سر, بہت بہت آپ کا شکریہ. مالویہ مشن کی طرف سے آپ کا شکریہ ادا کرتے ہیں کہ آپ نے ہماری پہ السلام علیکم سر.
السلام علیکم. تھینک یو سر.
تھینک یو سر.